Welcome to Positive Recovery MD. If you're listening, chances are you want to create happiness around you and thrive in your life. We're glad you're here and you've come to the right place. This podcast will inspire and motivate you to not merely survive your recovery journey, we'll give you the tools to build or strengthen your foundation to thrive and flourish in your life. Each week, we'll come together as a community to have authentic conversations around addiction, recovery, and what matters. Growth and progress, not perfection. All while developing positive habits for you to utilize in your life. To learn more, please visit positiverecoverymd.com to sign up to receive the daily positive interventions that we'll review, as well as gain access to exclusive Positive Recovery content available only to Positive Recovery MD listeners. All right, let's get started.
Welcome, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, to another installment of Positive Recovery MD with your host, Dr. Jason Powers. And I'm joined today with co-host Julie Denofa and John Cates.
So
glad to have you.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
We've known John how many years? At least as long as you've been.
Yep. So it's got to be at least 14 years for me.
Yeah, 14 years, and even before that for the old organizations that some of you guys have been connected with. Yeah, long time.
So tell our listeners sort of what is your title? What do you do? Where do you come from?
Well, my title is Goober, but but I also have and I'm an LCDC and I have a master's degree and all of that. But I am real involved with the Professional Association NADAC. I am I'm their regional vice president for these 4 states. I am the president of the Association of Alternative Peer Group Programs. Presently getting ready to finally roll off, and Dr. Edens will take over for a couple of years. I have been involved with TAP. I've been in the field for 45 years. Been doing a lot of things. Started back in the mid 70s with Palmer Drug Abuse Program. Ran it in 1979 when there were 3,700 people in it. Nancy Reagan came to speak at the gala. Year after that. And I've been involved with developing what we call the alternative peer group model ever since all of that time. I run Lifeway. Lifeway's been around. It's the second oldest of the alternative peer group programs. It started in 1985, and it hit at one time by 1992. It was in 11 cities in the United States and 3 in Canada. We had 4 residential programs, 4 recovery high schools. I was lucky enough as I entered recovery as a dope shooting teacher that almost went to prison for the rest of their life in 1975. When I found out I wasn't going to go to prison, I wanted to help, and not knowing what I was doing, according to Vanderbilt University, opened the first freestanding recovery high school anywhere, ever. And I say that not about me, but about Texas and Houston. A lot of people don't know this, but 50 years ago here in Houston, Texas, we were training and paying what have now become known as peer-to-peer counselors. We began that 50 years ago in this state and started developing processes to use that, et cetera. And I've been fortunate, kind of like riding on a train, riding on this thing the whole way and getting to watch all these things happen. Lifeway has had programs in Mexico and Bulgaria, and I said in Canada. 1997, it was the largest Medicaid program in Texas. It saw managed care come and blow things up, in 2 areas, recovered. And I get to watch this APG model open up all over the country right now. There are 40 different programs out there right now and growing, and watching recovery high schools become bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's the professional side. Anyhow.
That's amazing. And Julie, is it okay if we go a little bit out of order? Because what he just opened up, I can't help but want to dive into.
Absolutely. And I was all ready to just go there. So
okay, cool.
What I wanted for our listeners is to really understand when we talk about APGs or alternative peer groups, a lot of people don't know what that is, or who's appropriate to go to an alternative peer group, or what do they look like? And so, you've had 31 years, right, at least designing and developing solutions for recovery. And I believe you even coined the APG term, right? Is that true?
I did.
Yeah.
I happened to be the one who typed it out and put it in a paper that got presented somewhere. So I get that. Yeah.
Yeah, but that APG or alternative peer group is all across the country, and like you said, in other countries. So that's pretty cool to say that.
Yeah, it's real neat. Like I said, it's like riding a cool train. It's been a blast.
But if you were to describe exactly what an alternative peer group is to someone who had no knowledge, how would you start and what would that sound like?
Well, it probably would help to dip a little bit into history, because it illustrates what's so important about the APG model and why its effectiveness is so high. It began working with adolescents and young adults in the early 70s. A fellow named Bob Meehan and Father Charlie White Brown at Palmer Memorial Episcopal Church put together this program in the 70s. You can tell I'm an old dude, and in the 70s, it was very different environment out there. You really weren't very welcome at AA if you were a junkie, a 22-year-old junkie or an 18-year-old dope smoker. And so by accident, what happened is these programs, they couldn't do the old, here, come to the hospital and now go to AA or go to NA, because there was nothing to catch anybody. So by necessity, what they did was they started these meetings, but they were run by staff members that were trained and paid. And they started these meetings. And if you were an adolescent or a young adult and you were involved with substance use, you were welcome there. And there never was a place at that time really to send you on still. So you stayed there for long, kept coming to meetings for long periods of time. Okay. That's one element, is a long period of time with accountability, paid staff. That's continuity of care, accountability, and case management. Much longer than 30, 60, 90 days, but a long period of time. Then come along, guess what happens when adolescents come into a program, especially suburb adolescents in 1972? Guess who comes with them? Their parents. Well, out of necessity, these new counselors who were just trying to figure out how to keep people from dying or go to jail, they started going, well, we need a parent meeting, kind of like an Al-Anon meeting. Because again, if they walked into an Al-Anon meeting, they didn't fit very well there. So they thought, well, if I can just get the parents out of my face, I can do all the magic stuff that I'm doing with the young person, not realizing how important the family actually was and the parameters of the disease of substance use disorder. So they got this thing going. Then they started noticing that when they're working with young people, these things called relapse points would come along and over these long periods of time, and they would see them. And instead of a relapse point coming up and the counselor just having to throw their hands up in the air, go, oh, well, they're not willing, they haven't hit a bottom, all of those misunderstood issues around this disease, they actually had the parent there. And so they could turn to the parent and say, I need you to help me bring, and the term was at this time, I want you to help me bring the bottom up. See, I go back so far, intervention wasn't even a word at that time. All right. So the term they used was help me bring that bottom up. And they were having social activities and they were supposed to be fun. And so what you ended up with is what now we call in certain circles wraparound, wraparound activities. And they were for long periods of time. So it matched up with the research that we now have on the disease. This was back during a time we couldn't even say it was a disease. We had to say, we think it's a disease. It's termed a disease by certain organizations. It looks like a disease, but we didn't have the MRI and the CAT scan information to say, this is a broken brain caused by exposure to these substances, and it's developing aberrant psychology and bad decisions due to that. But now we can. But in those days, we were having to work with what we worked with, and we didn't realize that the amount of time that we were holding on to these clients matched up with what the research now says it takes to stabilize. We didn't realize that having those staff members looking over them and working with the families and the clients and the peer group is now what we call case management, And so we ended up developing these very effective modalities without the research to back it. Research came along and put it to it. So an APG is exactly that. It's a program that rides with the recovery process for 18 months to 4 years, includes family. In adults, it's wives, husbands, siblings, those kind of things, but rides that whole time and includes a new group of friends, plans social activities and stands ready to coach and interventive elements and interventive stances the whole time, so that the chances of reaching that are very, very high. Baylor College of Medicine says it almost doubles the typical approach. And that's the Basinger study.
So can I ask you to just backtrack? There was one element that you didn't offer that it was evidence-based, which I know is effective, but I don't know if there's any research out there. And that is adolescents almost need to be led by adolescents. Us fuddy-duddies aren't going to really make that much of an impact because the brain is naturally rebellious. So could you speak on that? Because you talked about the other two elements.
Well, actually, at the very end, when I mentioned the Basinger study, I was talking to Dr. Basinger the other day, last night, actually, is when it was. And he was talking about some of the studies that we have actually had for a while that say that an adolescent will listen to other adolescents or what they appear to be more than their family.
Right.
And, I mean, there's no surprise in that. But actually, there is actual research on that issue. When we would hire the peer counselors, and still what we do in the adolescent program, what I do in the adult programs is, guess who I hire? Adults.
Yeah.
Adults and we look for, we call it talent-based hiring. We look for people that other people naturally respond to them in a building relationship, some trust, etc. But yeah, actually the research is out there. I can't quote it because my mind, I'm 69 years old. I can't remember all that stuff, but it's out there, and Scott Basinger could tell you.
So what type of person is an APG meant for or appropriate for?
Well, given it's almost anybody that has this disease, because the social element of recovery is going to touch almost everybody. I guess the outliers are easier to describe than the person who are, who it's basically best for. The outliers would be folks that those unusual cases where the social activities, the social, elements in their lives are already solid and helpful in the recovery process. In that case, they really don't need that. But if we have actually broken the neurotransmitter regulation system and that aberrant psychology has started to develop, the number of times it's not going to enter into the social world of that person is very limited. So it becomes really a widespread person. A widespread audience, so to speak.
As far as APGs go, you've described that they're longer term, right? You said anywhere from 18 months to 4 years. If someone starts in an APG as an adolescent, do they age out, or is there something that could happen? Like, what if I'm 17 years old starting in your APG? Do I age out at a certain year, or is that a different model that I then transition to?
That's a great question. Actually, the APG has an endpoint for everybody. And this is something that also evolved over time. In the early days, back in that historic moment when there was really nothing to go to, developing a discharge goal or a discharge description there wasn't anything you could do with anybody anyway. They still needed to go to meetings, and it was helpful for them, so that they didn't worry about it. But with time, and the development and opening doors in young people's AA and AA to all of these kinds of people that were traditionally the clients at that time, well, everybody had to start looking at, and you have issues of countertransference and transference and unhealthy dependency and those kind of things, especially when it's staffed. And these were staffed programs. So the organizations, 30 years ago, really started to look at what are the discharge signs? What are the signs that let us know that stabilization has occurred? And over time and experience, they developed about 6 of those, six behaviors that were observable and recordable. And when you reach that, then there's a discharge from the process and movement. One of those things is you have insinuated yourself into a non-staffed support group and have those relationships there. That's one of the 6 signs. So there is discharge. It's not a forever program. And when I say average of 18 months to 4 years, might be a year, might be 5, depends on how much problem, there is, not only that presents at the time of diagnosis or intake, but also what kind of problems occur during the the process of recovery. Because as you know, y'all know what I'm talking about. I mean, you lose a family member 6 months out that you're dear and, that's dear to you, it's going to change your path. So it may elongate.
And traditionally, I think at least when I think of APGs, I think of adolescent care, but
everybody does.
Right. But really what I'm hearing today is that there's adult APGs, and that sounds pretty exciting to me in terms of what that can offer to an adult who's early in recovery.
Well, actually, right now, that's all Lifeway is doing is adults over 25-year-olds. There are 4, I believe, adolescent young adult APG programs in Houston. Lifeway is doing that. We've been doing over 25-year-olds, and we call them over the hillers, and we call them others groups, the others. And we've been doing them that now for almost 45 years, actually. And there were times when there were hundreds of them in different organizations, PDAP, Lifeway, and some of the others. But what happened was about 5 years ago, a movie was made about APGs called Generation Found. And it focused all on the adolescents and all on the recovery high school and pairing those two things together. And what it did is it launched this need on a national basis to produce these things. Well, those of us who had experience in it found ourselves moving around the country, helping other organizations open, getting the association going to bring some quality of care to it. And the adult programs kind of shut down. Well, I was kind of in a semi-retirement type thing as I was moving around. I don't know what I was doing, but I was always busy and moving around, but I was still getting calls from people wanting counseling. Well, given my background and where I come from, for me to counsel somebody without including family, peers, and addressing what the research says about the path to recovery and how long it takes, it felt at best unethical, for me to do that. So I got a guy that I felt like was talented, and he wanted to work with it. And we opened the meetings back up for the adults and for the families, and the adult program was launched again, resurrected. And I thought that would be good because it was always just as effective with people over 25 years old as it was under.
I'm just so curious about your longevity in the field. And I can't help it. I just want to ask, and it's okay. I want you to be a sophist because you've
I got to lift that term up.
Exactly. You're a wise man. You're a wise man.
Because
okay. I truly believe that. I didn't realize that you had been in this field for so long. So you've seen the birth of establishing addiction as a disease, its change of terms in the DSM. And I'm not a big fan of the DSM. And I only say that because I'm going to ask you, what do you see as the trends that have happened? Anything kind of circling back? I feel like I don't have as much of a perspective as you, but I feel like there's a pendulum that's going like this. And depending where you catch it, where do you think we've made the most progress? And where do you think we're chasing our tail?
Okay.
2 very simple questions. One word answer.
Yeah. We know a great deal more about the disease than we have ever known. We know a great deal more about the efficacy of different ways of approaching. All of this is my opinion and based on my experience. We know all of those things I just named, that in an alternative peer group program and a bunch of other mediums too provide. Those are all good things, and they did not exist in 1970. They didn't exist, guys. I'll tell you, now they do. You know what else has progressed is the disease. The numbers and the culture who are using is massively larger. The numbers of when I had family members in the past, I would get a call in 1979. I would get a call from a mom or a dad say, "Little Johnny got caught smoking dope at school. We had no idea. When can you meet with us? We'll take off work. We will be there." Now I get calls. Well, it's the 4th time. And we thought marijuana actually was helping him because we've been told that on TV, and we've been smoking ourselves for the last 15 years and it hasn't done anything bad to us. Now we've had 2 or 3 marriages, and we're about to get another divorce here. And we were just wondering, do you have any sessions? Do you do sessions after 5? Because we really don't want to take off. In the old days, they came in and they said, what can we do to help? Now they come in and they say, what are you going to do? That's one of the big areas. So despite the fact that we've moved ahead with knowledge of treatment and knowledge of the disease itself, the commercialization and the movement of the culture at large toward more and more use of more and more destructive substances has outpaced us, frankly. I spent 8 years of my own time and money lobbying for insurance parity, for insurance companies to pay for treatment for substance abuse, just like they pay for treatment of a liver transplant. It's still so poor, so bad. It's just ridiculous. I just came off another call a few minutes ago with an organization that's trying to form some legislation elements to face off with the movement of marijuana, legalized marijuana. And decriminalizing is not the same thing as legalization.
Right.
But that's a perfect example of how we're up against a massive amount of money, a massive amount of greed, and a massive amount of human nature's desire to bring
Users,
on good,
right. The
good
demand
feelings for nothing.
Right, right.
And so those are the biggest changes. And that's it. Unfortunately, I personally feel like the opponent is moving faster and harder than we are.
Well, what about give us cause for hope? No, I only say that. And I don't want you to throw out a platitude. And listen, I hear you. I'm down with reality. Like, yeah, we've got a big bad foe, and God knows what's going to happen if more people are using marijuana with its link to psychotic diseases and affect diseases and things like that. So I'm not telling you to put on rose-colored glasses or lie.
Right. Well, I will tell you that I sit on these committees. I'm on the public policy committee for NADAC. I just came off of that committee call with that's opposition to marijuana legalization, or actually commercialization. My opinions, the very things that have added some mileage to the enemy, if we can learn to use them correctly, could add some mileage to our opposition. And those things are social media. If we can learn to use social media, we have it on our side that we've got it's the truth. And the truth will set you free. Talking about platitudes. I believe that. But we got to get it out there. And we have to mobilize the population. And that's not going to be easy. We're going to have to start with our recovery population to begin with, to get them to stand up, tell the truth, and the families that bury children. Dads and moms and that kind of thing. I think that's in my opinion. And when I'm in those public policy committee meetings and all, that's what I am pushing for, is let's get the truth out there and get the people behind the truth who have suffered from the lies, and use social media just like it's been used the other direction.
Awesome.
Just a very brief kind of, for our listeners, like, you have so much passion about recovery, and like your whole life has pretty much revolved around the recovery community. So how does a guy like you, what's a little bit about your story? Like, what brought you to this recovery community the way that you show up every day?
Well, anytime there's a stage, I'm going to jump on it. But I brought the guitar out because there's another element to all this. And that has to do with, we talked about enthusiastic recovery. We talked about how are we going to address things. We talked about different mediums, and music and acting and dance and all of those kind of things always take a part in an enthusiastic recovery program. If I'm going to talk about my history and how I got into it and the passion, well, the passion's in the music in some cases, and so I thought, well, what the heck? I'm going to go ahead and pull it out anyway. At least it will be something. It'll be a show and tell element anyhow. But
well, hey, John, I'm sitting on a cajon. I can.
All right, Julie, what you got?
I can snap.
I don't know if we're actually going to do music or just talk about music, but I did need this show and tell thing. Anyhow, so.
You have a song that kind of tells your story?
Yeah, I know it. Yeah.
All right. Maybe you ought to do that.
Hey, real quick, John, Socrates or Plato, I think it was Plato said, no, it was Socrates Johnson. It was Socrates. He said, nothing moves the soul like music.
That's right. It
Never
is
forget
that way. Well, here's my story. When I tell my story, it is entitled, I Was a Good Boy, because I was. There's a great deal of mythology and fact that gets misused about this disease. My story actually flies in the face and disproves a great deal of that. Family issues, genetics. My story puts the genetic issue into appropriate understanding. Everybody thinks there's a drunk gene or an addict gene, and there's not. There's a resistance, that's genetic, yes, to attack from these substances. And I'm sure y'all know this better than I do. There was no genetic predisposition in my family going back generations. No alcoholics, no addicts, no nothing. My parents were hero parents. They came straight out of How to Be a Parent in a loving, caring way book. My dad was a hero, World War II hero. And I mean, a true hero. Shot down twice, bailed out twice into Japanese-held China, walked out 2 times, flew during the Korean War, flew the bomb, and I'm talking the bomb. He died from radiation exposure, flying the plane into the last above ground testing. It was 20 years later, so even there's no trauma there. I don't have trauma in my background. I wasn't beaten. I wasn't abused. None of that. Work ethic. I started mowing yards when I was 8 years old, and I mowed mine. I mowed, neighbors and made our own money. Education. I was taught in school, we'll be fine if you will just go to class, do the homework, and study for the tests. I did that. Guess what happens when you do that? You make pretty dang good grades. So my grades were pretty good. Everything went along fine. 12 years old, I do play the guitar a little bit and I sing a little bit. Yeah. I just should have been raised in the church. Oh, guess what? I was. And it was not toxic either. No toxic religion. Nothing. At 7 years old, actually, I decided, yes, for me, I'm a Christian. And it was a real loving, giving, grace-filled God, not a fire, brimstone, you're going to hell, you idiot deal. It was supportive. So none of those things. 12 years old, I'm in a little rock and roll band in Amarillo, Texas. I'm not in LA. I'm not in New York. I'm in Amarillo, Texas. All right. 12 years old, J.C. Sturkel's house. And the other day I was speaking somewhere and his brother came up and says, I remember you. But J.C., his parents leave. He goes, my parents have left. Let's go get in the liquor cabinet. Now you would think, and here's what I had been taught by these wonderful, giving, loving, caring hero people. I had been taught, don't drink until you're 21. And even if you do, you be really careful because I have seen it kill and mess people up really, really bad. So of course I said no to JC when he said, let's get in the liquor cabinet. Y'all don't believe that, do you? No, you don't. Well, you're right. I didn't. I said, okay. And I walked over and I drank my first hit of whiskey and acted like, oh, that's good stuff. Like I was a big whiskey drinker.
Meanwhile, it was burning your throat all the way down.
Oh, man, I thought I was going to puke. And later on did, by the way. But I found out a couple of things. One was that it really did make me sick. Second, I found out when I got home, my mother, and I didn't tell you, but my parents, they didn't have a shy bone in their body. My mother could smell alcohol before you turned the corner at the end of the street. She had the best nose anywhere for smelling it, and she wasn't shy. So immediately she confronted me, got my dad down, smell his breath. I'm denying. And I learned that if you deny strong enough, people who love you will make up excuses for you. This is not a cognitive thing. This was an affective thing. This was just an instinctual thing that moved ahead. Later, I found out, I thought for a long time, why did I say yes? After all of those good messages from all of those good people, why did I say yes? Well, I know why now. And it gets back to some of the things we were talking about fighting this war. Even in 1962, I had already spent 12 years in front of black and white TV and Technicolor movies and black and white movies where people like Marilyn Monroe, Gina Lollobrigida, John Wayne, all of those guys, every one of them were looking. They were hot, successful, sophisticated. Man, they were happening. Every single one of them had a drink in their hand. Every one. And every one of them owned a piece of the breweries and the distilleries. And it started way back then, and they're a big part of what we're up against, and pulling that out and dealing with the commercialization and the merchant and the marketing is going to be a big issue and all. Anyhow,
you know what I've noticed, John? Like a lot of celebrities have, whiskey and, gin brands, and this didn't happen 20 years ago.
No.
But you're telling me it happened in the 50s, 60s.
Yeah, well, it wasn't as open. They played because they had a big, large, reactive Christian part of the country.
Right.
In the culturally speaking, the Christian values were going on that were kind of pushing against all that. Not anymore, not anymore. So it's grown and grown and grown. Anyhow, so there I am. But I got these parents who aren't shy, and CPS stood for Child Punishment Services in those days. So you did what they said, and you were really careful, and I was. And I didn't drink hardly at all from the time I was 12 till I was 17. My parents moved into Gulfport, Mississippi the summer before my senior year. And I didn't want to go to high school my senior year in a brand new high school. I had gotten a little bit ahead because of being an Air Force brat, and graduated on my 17th birthday. I graduated from high school. Came to the University of Houston shortly after that. I was working full time while I took 21 hours in a junior college.
Wow.
To make the money so that even when my parents said they didn't want me leaving at 17, I could. And I came to the University of Houston. They went ahead and signed the papers, started taking over full-time classes. I worked full-time here, but I also ran into this thing called marijuana. And I loved it. I loved the feeling. Alcohol had always made me kind of sick, and gave me hangovers. Marijuana, no hangovers, immediately good feelings. Everybody, and I was being told by some very cool and sexy people that it was really good for us, already back in 1968 and 69. So from the time I'm 17 until I'm 25 years old, I get loaded every day with something. The last 4 years, I'm shooting heroin, and I move on through all of this. Everybody thinks, and then your life crashed. No. That's not how it works. I learned how to use amphetamines to study hard and heroin to sleep. And I graduated in 3 years from the University of Houston, working full time as a teacher. I'm working full time with HISD as a teacher. And I register and start working on my master's degree in educational administration. Going to be a dope shooting principal or something, I guess. And marry my high school sweetheart. And she's also getting high. And summer of love, it's getting creepier and weirder. And with substance use comes human abuse, and relationship abuse. And so, of course, that happened. We had split up. I had moved in with a guy over in the East End. You can't afford, y'all don't know this, you can't afford very much heroin on a teacher salary. You can't, it's not there, especially in those days. It was a lot more expensive then than it is now.
Well, it was more pure, I bet.
Well, we'll
direct from
in a minute. That's coming up.
Okay.
Anyhow, so I moved in with a guy who actually was dealing. It was the beginning of the entry of Mexican tar here into the United States. Black tar heroin, and he was dealing, and I would be around and help with the deals, and therefore I would get, a piece of the action. I am the poster child of here's a guy who can do his dope, and his dope doesn't do him. I'm going to graduate school, I'm teaching school, I got girlfriends, I got a car, I got a house, all this cool stuff, and we have a chance to do a deal that's 10 times bigger than we've ever done. And we say, okay, we'll do it. And it turns out to be what is going to become the DEA. It was a setup with feds. And I'm arrested. And I'm on TV. And I'm in the newspaper. School teacher, sales and possession of a record amount of heroin for Harris County in 1975. Houston.
Congratulations, by the way.
Oh, it was amazing. And they rewarded me by taking me to Harris County Jail with a huge bond. I mean, gigantic. And I'm not talking about the motel that we call the jail now. I'm talking the old Harris County Jail. There were guys there from Cook County said that this was worse than Chicago's worse.
Wow.
So there I am. I'm 6'1". I weigh 145 pounds. I'm this tall, skinny white kid with nothing going on. Walking around, there were 30 beds in the jail. There were 125 people for those 30 beds in that place. And what we slept on were these black foam rubber mattresses on the floor. And I thought it was black, but it was oil that had soaked into the foam rubber. I saw a guy get beat to death in the back of the jail. He was tripping on acid and flushing the commode and watching the colors flare around. And some of the guys went back and killed him that night. You talking about one scared little guy? That was me. So there I am. The funny thing was I was the hugest wiener walking around, but I'm on TV in the day room. And so they think I'm connected. You got these really, truly dangerous bad guys that are like, stay away from the guys. And I guess I was, because I had my times with guns and holding guns on people and stuff like that, because I was crazy and during the deals, but I never, thank God, had to use one. But the scary thing is I would have. I was that insane by that. I'd gone so far from the good boy. It was ridiculous. Anyhow, so Mike actually had some money, so he was able to get a bond. And after about a week, he was able to get me out. And I went to an attorney, and he said, you need to go back to church, you need to get a job, and you need to get into this Palmer Drug Abuse Program, PDAP. So I went back to church, South Main Baptist Church, 1975, Baptist Church. Takes me about 3 weeks. I joined the choir. It takes me 3 weeks to find who in the choir is getting high. Okay. And so I ended up living with a girl who played the flute for the choir. She was a teacher who smoked dope. So that's going back to church to get sober. I do pull up on the heroin, but I'm still smoking and drinking a lot, smoking dope and drinking a lot. And every once in a while, if I could get a little bump, I would do that. Next thing is, well, I'll go get a job. My mother, bless her heart, calls. I destroy my parents. They're just destroyed. My mother calls the Christian Businessmen's Association, and the guy named James Poovey, who owned True Mix Concrete Company, gave me a job. So my little 145-pound self walks on the gravel yard at True Mix Concrete Company. It takes me about 45 minutes to find out where they're smoking dope in the back, behind the reclaimer in that. So that's getting a job to get sober. The PDAP thing, that really bugged me. I was like, those people are stupid. They don't understand. I don't want to have to go deal with them right now. I'm going to put it off. Okay. 4 months later, I get a call to the office at the concrete company. And there's a lady who lived in the garage apartment behind our house. Mike's and I'm still living part-time with Mike and, whatever girl will let me come in. That night before that, I had spent the night with a girl. I come to the thing, and she says, John, I don't know how to tell you this. Mike's dead. Now, Mike was just another suburb guy like me. I went, what? Yeah, the police came this morning. They were undercover, I believe. They looked rough, and there was a big gunfight, and he's dead. I went, what? So we find out, it sounds like that what happened was the undercover agents came to arrest us again because he was still dealing. And if you haven't ever seen an undercover agent, especially in 1975, were rough-looking characters. He apparently thought they were other junkies coming to rip him off. He runs to his bedroom, slams the door shut, opens his closet door, brings out a deer rifle, fires 3 shots through the door, hits 3 federal agents, and they shoot him 12 times and kill him. Guess who's back on TV? And that's horrible. And they didn't arrest me because I wasn't there, but I was associated. And now in the initial charge, I'm the only one left to prosecute. So not only am I on TV again, the prosecutor's making written statements that he'd rather see a murderer go free than somebody like me. He's planning on asking, he makes it public, he's planning on asking 90 years, which was worse than a life sentence. Because 90 years, 34 years for your first opportunity parole, life sentence at that time was 16 years. And there I am. And my poor parents they're just blow number 2. It was already bad. So I think I better go to this Palmer Drug Abuse Program, that last thing on the list. So I go and I lie like a dog. I put my joint out in the old pickup truck's ashtray that I drive up in. I go in, I talk to Jim Welburn, I lie like a dog. He could have said, you lying dog, we know who you are. He only had 2 years sober himself. He was one of the beginning of peer-to-peer counseling, like I said. He was trained in PDAP to counsel, and he was in recovery himself, but he didn't. What he said to me was, he said, we know who you are. He said, you've been on TV. He said, and we can help you. but you're going to have to come to these meetings. You're going to have to let us get to know you. You know, that soft, interventive reality is you're going to be leveraged into complying with something that you don't believe in, you don't like, you don't think it's for you, you don't think you need it, etc. So I started going to those meetings, and they had cute girls, cool guys. They played music, some of them, you know, it fit with me. And I got sober, and I had 4 months sober when I went to trial. And an absolute, and I'm telling you guys, it was an absolute straight out of God miracle that I was supposed to go to prison that day. And they came out and they gave me 10 years probation. The attorney said, I don't know what happened. I would love to tell you this is something I did. It wasn't me. It would take something bigger than the governor to pull this off. I later found out what had happened. But at the time, it was 2 years later before I found out what. But at the time, it was just God just handed me my life. And in fact, that's what happened. And then I started trying to help and trying to work for, you know, and that's when I started the school. I wanted to help. So in my apartment, I started up the high school. There were a bunch of people who had been kicked. In those days, there were no recovery schools. There were no alternative schools at the district. You got caught, you got kicked out. That was it.
What happened? You said you found out 2 years later? You got to, I don't make
so much coincidence in all of this. That it's not coincidence. All right. 2 years later, I get a call from a gentleman, and he had a son in the program, okay, who was the same age that I was. And he had gotten involved. And this gentleman knew lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people. And I'm not going to mention names or anything. All right. But he knew everybody on an international basis. All right. He had spent years deep in the governments and all of that. His son was in the program, we both were at the same probation meeting on the same day. You know, when you get probation, then you have to go to this orientation meeting. We were in the same group. I had seen him in meetings. I didn't even know him, but some people some of the staff who could see what was happening had gotten in touch with him and told him that I was going to go to prison, and they really thought it was really, really a bad thing, and that if he could help. He made Carol Vance was the DA at the time, but he was in Hawaii. He made calls across, and it wasn't easy to make a call to Hawaii in those days. It was harder than now, but apparently he got in touch with Carol Vance and a bunch of other people. And how it happened is my attorney he was called back to the judge's chambers, and he came back, and I'm telling you, he was as white as a sheet. I've never, and this was a tough attorney. This is a real guy. Stuart Kennard was his name, and he went on to be a force in Austin and everything. He had a long history of very, very good processes legally prior to my case. He comes out, he says, and that's when he said, I don't know what's happened. He said, here's the deal. You're going to get sentenced to a real, that 90 years, but then they're going to give you 10 years probation. He said, the problem is you've got to say you're guilty. Of course, I was already going to do that. And he said, you got to go ahead and you got to wait until they say it. And I'm telling you, they could turn it around at the last minute. So I went in and I went up front, and sure enough, they had 90 years, blah, blah, blah. And he stopped and he paused and he says, however, at the advice of the district attorney and the probation department, we're going to give you 10 years probation. And and then 2 years later, I get a call from the guy who had made it all happen.
Wow.
Yeah. So that gets us down. If you really want to try and do music on a Zoom call, I can do that if you want me to.
Sure.
Let's do it.
All right. We'll give it a try. I really hadn't planned on this, but I don't know. It just kind of got started happening, because this is the song that really fits most. Can you hear it okay?
We can.
There is a house in New Orleans they call the rising sun, and it's been the ruin of many a poor boy. Oh God, I know I'm one. Now my mother was a tailor. She sewed my new blue jeans, and my father was a gambling man, all down in New Orleans. Now the only thing a gambler needs, suitcase and a trunk, and the only time that he is satisfied is when he's on a drunk. Now mothers, tell your children, don't you do what I have done. 'Cause you'll spend your life in pity and misery in the house of the rising sun. Then it gets worse. I got one foot on that platform, the other foot on that train. Oh, 'cause I'm going back to New Orleans, to where that bubble. Wait a minute. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I was blind, but now I see. There is a house in New Orleans they call the rising sun.
Woo!
There you go.
All right. John, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And, it's just amazing when I listen to your story and just listen to you talk in general. Like, there's so many different pathways that your story could have taken. And so we are for sure going to jump right into our positive intervention. We read from the Positive Recovery Daily Guide. And I know that we asked you to help us and participate in one of these. And so I'm going to go ahead and read, and then I'm going to ask a little bit about your experience with it. The quote is by Maria Robinson. Nobody can go back and start a new beginning, but anyone can start today and make a new ending. The average person has over 70,000 thoughts every day. I think I have way more, but thoughts are not made up of some magical dust. They are physical pathways in the brain. The more you practice thinking of how you can start from here and make a new ending, the more you strengthen that pathway. The more you strengthen that pathway, the easier the message will be to accomplish. Over time, this thought process can even become an automatic reaction, increasing your resilience. Don't brush this off as something achievable without work. Thoughts can alter your life, so be prepared to dig in and apply yourself. This is worth doing over and over and over again. The rewards will follow your actions. Remember, positive recovery is a verb. So for today's positive intervention, even if you have a full day of negative thoughts, start over and make a new ending right now. Think it. Thinking about negative situations in more useful, positive ways literally rewires your brain by creating new pathways. This can make you happier and more resilient. This is so perfect for you, John. So tell me how it was doing this positive intervention.
Well, those are the things that were taught to me. And it was something. There's a little bit more of the story that I haven't told you. My dad, remember him, the soldier. One of the most important things in his life was honor. And we don't talk about that in the culture very much. That word doesn't get used. It did in the 60s and the 50s, not so much anymore. Root word of honor is honesty. And it was super important to my father. And I knew that, he was again, the most loving, giving, caring guy I ever met, but he was also a hero, and honor was a big thing to him. And I knew that. Well, the last day before the trial, my father, the attorney, said, listen, there is word that there may be something that can be done. But remember me saying the district attorney is out of town. And we have heard that something can be done, but DA is out of town. So if we could postpone it for some reason, the trial, we could buy a little time to do whatever this is that I'm hearing about. My dad's in the room. He turns to my dad. He says, Mr. Cates, would you consider faking a catastrophic heart attack or something like that? And he said he would. And I said, no, Dad, I can't let you do that. Just can't. Now, by that time I had 4 months sober, and was redeveloping those day by day positive thoughts. Think back, do back, act yourself into thinking, repetition, those kind of things. They were really a big thing back then. And so this very thing we're talking about today was having an effect. And there were two things that came out of that. One was the resurrection of my own honor. And two, the realization that for my father, there was something that he loved more than his own. That was me. And it gave me things to build on the rest of my life.
And you've built on them in such a way, and I see it in everything that you do, and just, the courage and the bravery. And so thank you so much for sharing that piece with us and how it fits into the positive intervention. Dr. Powers, when we're talking about that, like when you're working with clients, or even if you want to share your own experience around that, what about this positive intervention for you?
Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. I'm sort of overwhelmed with emotion from listening to that story, John, that not only would your father have lied for you, sacrificed his integrity, but the fact that you wouldn't let him shows the honor, the character in you, that even though what was facing you wasn't really high, characterologically, got to have made your dad proud that you wouldn't have let him do that. I'm so moved. If my son talks of me half as well as you talk of your father, I think I will have done a good job.
I know the feeling. I have a son too. I know exactly what you're saying. That's my prayer.
Yeah, man, I'm sure. And, I didn't know you as well as I do now. I love you. I can't believe we haven't spent more time together. I'm now sort of pissed.
Likewise.
Oh my God.
I sent Grant in.
Yeah, and I send him back.
No, you keep him.
Okay.
I can't wait for him to see this.
We won't fight over him.
Yeah, he'll tell you what sophist means. It means full of shit. So on a serious note, on the intervention, this one's kind of easy for me because as we know, people who, and I have depression. Some days it's like worse than others. Some days it's better than others. And we know that people who are depressed see the world and explain the world in sort of a pessimistic, explanatory style. So something bad happens. Well, of course it happens. It's going to happen to me. This is just part of my life. It's going to last forever, that type of thing. So I have the opportunity every single day to sort of practice this. Some days I'm very successful at it. Some days I'm not. But, in particular, the last couple of weeks, I've had to reach in deep and sort of just kind of keep rewriting a new ending. And I mean, Julie, I can say there wasn't any one day I did this. I do this a lot. And and it works. It's hard, but it's so much better than not doing the work and just sort of being an automatic pilot, because that's just not good. That for people like me, not good.
40 years of it. I have 2 grown kids who love to go do things with us, and which means they're not getting high. I have a wife of 40 years. We love COVID because we get to spend all our time hanging out with each other. I got to hear my father say, "I'm so proud of you," before he died. I have been all over the world. I've spoken in Moscow. I've opened programs in Bulgaria. I've been I've been everywhere, had a chance, like I said, ridden a train that was just unbelievable. And Mine's not depressions. Mine's anxiety. That's the one that I fight with this interventive step, this day after day of rethinking and then acting on that thought. And it's powerful, just powerful.
Yeah, for sure. I know sometimes Dr. Powers kind of tells me like, oh, you're the cheerleader, you're super optimistic. And most times I am. I have a pretty high set point. Like I'm really generally a positive person in general. And lately I've been having to reshift a little bit more just from some stuff that I'm kind of working through. But what I will say about this is I saw somebody today that I hadn't seen in a bit, or what felt like a bit. And I said, yeah, but I miss you. And the response that I got back was, but I got to see you today. And I was like, wow, that's right. And that's enough. And that's enough for right now. So it was a good piece. And it just quickly reminded me of how easy it is to switch that and to kind of change the pathway of your thinking and going to, what is right with this situation, or how can I change this negative to a positive? And again, it's not to sugarcoat anything. There's going to be things that happen to us in life that are negative. But when you can start to reframe, it really does help. And then, of course, the healing begins and a more positive energy comes from you. So, but I have enjoyed today's podcast tremendously, John, with you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Good stuff. Fun stuff.
Yeah. Thanks so much, John. And thank you guys for listening.
Lunch, dude. Lunch.
Absolutely. Dude, hell yeah. We could play some music too.
And Julie, you have to be there. I don't mean him. I mean, y'all.
Okay.
Very good. Our package deal.
All right.
All right. And you have to bring like a kazoo or something.
Got it. I will.
Bless your hearts. I really didn't plan on doing that. I hope I'm afraid to listen to the recording, but it'll be what it is. It is what it is. Y'all have a good afternoon. And thank you
so much. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, listeners, for listening to Positive Recovery MD with Dr. Jason Powers and Julie DeNofa.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Positive Recovery MD. Don't forget to visit positiverecoverymd.com to sign up to get your daily positive intervention sent straight to your inbox. Be sure to subscribe to Positive Recovery MD on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts to receive an automatic download when a new episode drops. And as always, if you or someone you know needs help, visit positiverecovery.com or call 877-4SOBRIETY, which is 877-476-2743. We are here to help.